So you have all of these NGOs now very much involved in fueling the boycott, divestment, and sanctions process. If you're in the UK, you know the Methodist Church just adopted a resolution with the involvement of Christian Aid, with the involvement of War on Want, which promotes the BDS and the isolation process. The academic boycott comes up every year. The divestment from Israeli firms by Norwegian and other Scandinavian groups. The poster that you see here is from Oxfam Belgium, and it has the anti-Semitic echoes in it as well. Lawfare is another aspect. Each one of these is worth more than 30 seconds. It's worth hours of work, and we have detailed reports on how the NGOs are behind this process. Many lawfare cases have been brought up. None of them have advanced beyond the preliminary stages. They've all been dismissed, but the main point is that each one generates headlines in newspapers. There was recently a case in Canada in which Al-Haq, which gets funding from the Ford Foundation and European governments, one of the more powerful Palestinian-based NGOs, initiated a case through some Palestinian residents who claimed some Canadian connection about being hurt economically by the separation barrier. It was a legal case in Canada. It was dismissed, but in the meantime, it got a lot of headlines connecting Israel. The separation barriers became the apartheid wall, and the suffering, the victimization of Palestinians became very clear. If Al-Haq and the other NGOs had not been developing this, had not paid for the lawyers, had not brought Israelis like Michael Sfard, a witness, to come and testify, the amount of money behind this process is overwhelming, and it's in every phase you can imagine. And we'll see another round being prepared right now on the flotilla case. Again, not expecting to win the cases, but to create the PR process and start the cycle over again. Now, if you're from Europe, one of the most damaging aspects is the multi-million-dollar funding that European governments provide. I'm often asked, certainly this money must come from the Saudis, from the Gulf states, from Iran. No. Most of the funding comes from European governments. The Arab countries don't even have to put the money into it, and that it makes it more legitimate. So this is a conference that took place in Cairo. This is taken from Al Jazeera. Look at the language that's used in the banner. This is where lawfare comes from. Look who's funding it. European Union and Oxfam. This is entirely illegitimate. It's an entirely immoral use of partnerships for peace money, and it's all being done secretly. The next phase of this process will be through the International Criminal Court. The prosecutor for over a year has been developing a case against Israel, initially launched by the Arab League. Now again, all of these processes are entirely inconsistent with the peace negotiations. There's an Arab Initiative peace plan, which the Obama administration is certainly going to put back on the table in the process of the negotiations. I expect we're going to hear about it from President Mubarak, from King Abdullah, perhaps from President Obama as well in the next couple of days. The same Arab League is conducting and leading the process of lawfare and pushing the International Criminal Court to open prosecution against a number of Israeli officials. And that could happen in September or October. There's another meeting to take place. And in addition to that, you have Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International bombarding the ICC with pressure to adopt the Goldstone report and open prosecution against Israel. Ken Roth, the head of Human Rights Watch, who one might have thought would have resigned by now, given all the scandals at Human Rights Watch, including the denunciation a year ago by the founder of Human Rights Watch, Robert Bernstein, in the New York Times. And he continues to float along. And the number of Palestinian groups funded by European organizations and Israeli-based organizations like the Public Committee Against Torture in Israel and Adallah, who focus their efforts on demonizing Israel through these processes. You either have peace or you're going to have this political warfare, but the two don't go together. The rhetoric of apartheid, and I'm running out of time, the rhetoric of apartheid is repeated over and over again. As Professor Irwin Cotler, who was the Canadian Justice Minister, said, the purpose is to lead to the dismantling of Israel. Again, if you have peace, then you don't promote this kind of agenda. It is entirely incompatible. You don't give money to Mada al-Karmel, that was the group that I showed in the first poster, with the alleged rape and sexual harassment images, completely staged. Human Rights Watch using the same language of apartheid. You two do not go together. Certainly the same thing is true for the Goldstone report. It's going to come up in a number of sessions of the Human Rights Council in the next month or so. I think Eli Lake of the Washington Times is writing a piece called The Black September, and how we're going to be bombarded with demonization in the next month based in the United Nations. Flotilla hearings, Goldstone reports, ICC, over and over again. And these NGOs are very much, the Goldstone report didn't come out of nowhere. The language of Goldstone, the entire process, the people involved, Goldstone himself, are based on that foundation of NGOs. It's important to note that Goldstone is very close to Ken Roth and was a member of the Human Rights Board of Directors until he became head of the Committee of Inquiry, and NGO Monitor pointed out that there was the inconsistency. So these are some of the events being planned the next month. This is an example of the type of biased agenda the Human Rights Watch has. And now we have the scum statements from the Finnish head of Amnesty International. What do we do about this? And I'll use the next 30 seconds just to say, and I probably should have gotten here earlier, we are able to combat this. It's not like it was at Durban 1. Many of you were at Durban 2, and we're able to keep the NGOs far away from the discussions, and they complained bitterly about that. Some of us were called the generals of the six-day Durban 2 war, and that was by Naomi Klein, and I think I'm proud of that label. We worked very hard, and what was key to that was the combination of naming and shaming that took place, and preparedness, and closely working together, and the WJC was a key member of that coalition. And it shows that we can do this. If we put the resources and the focus into fighting lawfare, not just the cases, but with the strategy and where the money comes from, turning off the valves. Who was it? The American Attorney General who said, follow the money. And that's key here. There's so much money in this process that we need to be able to identify that, starting with turning off the valve from the European Union. We've had some success with the Ford Foundation, needs to continue. There is an embarrassment factor. The naming and shaming works. Amnesty International, I don't think, will be able to sustain having the head of its Finnish branch having called Israel a scum state. There'll be more articles. We know there'll be another piece coming out in the next couple of days. We're keeping this on the agenda, and if he stays, Amnesty loses its credibility even more than it already has. Human Rights Watch is now living with a major limitation on their credibility, and we need to go farther with that until they remove the people in the Middle East division who are very much involved in this delegitimization process. The website that we created is part of that process. It's an important part of that process. I think many of you get our emails. The research that we do, we are now conducting on an almost daily basis communications, exchanges of emails. The European Union officials now have to answer our emails, our requests for information, because the officials there have realized that what they're doing violates their own rules. We're having a discussion now, an email discussion, about whether Danish organizations, Dan Church Aid, which funds a lot of these organizations, has been contributing to anti-Semitism and violating its own basic rules and regulations and the rules and the regulations of the Danish government. We're having this with a number of different organizations, and it is beginning to pay off. So this kind of sustained pressure, the combination of research, publication, naming and shaming, and expanding the framework is having an impact. So I would have to say, with the work that other people are being done, and we'll hear from General Cooperwasser and Fiamma now about the tremendous work that they're doing, we have a functioning network, and I think in the next year or two, although the challenges seem very, very strong, our ability to deal with them and I think to defeat them is becoming greater. Thank you.